Naruto Shippuden Legends! Akatsuki Rising!
What a drag.
Chapter 8 Voice of Rage!
Good job.
Shadow Paralysis Jutsu! 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 What? Scumbag! 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 Shadow Paralysis Jutsu! Scumbag! Scumbag! What? Shadow Paralysis Jutsu! Shadow Paralysis Jutsu! Shadow Paralysis Jutsu! Shadow Paralysis Jutsu!
Guests will be arriving soon, my man.
Shadow paralysis jutsu! 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 Scumbag! Shadow paralysis jutsu! 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 Scumbag! Shadow paralysis jutsu! 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 Shadow paralysis jutsu!
Give Kara back!
You're quite an unusual Jinchuriki.
I can tell just for
How about this? Shadow paralysis jutsu! 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 Paralysis jutsu! Shadow paralysis jutsu! Shadow paralysis jutsu! Scumbag! Shadow paralysis jutsu! Shadow paralysis jutsu! Shadow paralysis jutsu!
I better take out that Jinchuriki before Kakashi catches up.
Shadow paralysis jutsu! 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 Take this! Take this! You can't escape! Take this! You can't escape! Take this! Shadow paralysis jutsu! You can't escape! Shadow paralysis jutsu! Shadow paralysis jutsu! Shadow paralysis jutsu!
I wanted to see what he's made of.